Loki and Isa had been running for a long time now, but they were unable to tell how long exactly. So stop! Isa gasped, before stopping and leaning against a tree. Loki turned his head sharply towards her, retracing his steps and grabbing her arm fiercely. We need to move, he hissed, despite being out of breath as well. He pulled her at her, but she moved away, pulling her arm out of his grip. No, I can't run until I can breathe again, she exclaimed, leaning against the cold tree. Loki stared at her, terribly annoyed. He looked around him suspiciously, still having this creepy feeling of being watched by the trees. He clicked his tongue anxiously, playing nervously with his daggers in hand. Do you know anything about this witch? He asked, sounding urgent. Her retracing looked up at him, her cheeks red from running and her face covered in sweat. She stared at him for a moment before sighing. No, I had never heard of her name before today. I don't even know if I'm of these iron woods, she murmured, looking at the ground. I don't like this place. We have to get out of here. Really? I thought we could have stayed here. Maybe made a little barbecue and rest and watching the stars in the night sky at night, she mocked. Loki clenched his jaw, his gaze murderous. Isa looked around, looking more worried than she wanted to. But can we? Can we at least get out of these woods? If it belongs to the Hyrokin, then? We will, he cut sharply. She pursed her lips. The two stared at each other, tension creating electricity between them. We have to get out of here, Loki said, not wishing to spend any more time resting. Suddenly, he flinched and moaned, dropping his dagger on the ground, glaring furiously at his shaking hand. Isa's eyes followed his gaze and her eyes widened, lips parted in shock. You're hurt! She exclaimed, surging towards him. What happened? It's Hyrokin's children, the wolves, he growled, closing and opening his fists as more blood flowed from his wound from the wrist. That cursed witch, she hissed, frowning the cold light in her green eyes. Almost immediately, her hand was lightened by the green of cedar, which Isa used to heal Loki's hand and arm. He observed her in silence, feeling this wound closing and pain lessening. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief when the pain started to disappear. It wasn't completely gone, but it was better than he could hope for. We should start moving, he said, once she was done, turning his heels around. You could at least thank me, she replied, walking behind him. Loki froze and turned around almost sharply, his movement so sudden that Isa almost bumped into him. She looked up into his eyes, emerald green against her water green. They stared at each other for a long moment until he sighed and lowered his gaze just slightly. Thank you for healing me, he said in a low voice. Oh, we're going to get out of these woods, right? She asked in a whisper, her voice shaking, her eyes filled with terror as she was trying to hold back. Loki stared at Isa for a long moment. A part of him wanted to promise her that he would save them both, but his heart was tight with fear. No one had ever escaped the Iron Woods, and he didn't want to find out whether or not Hedder was real. He was the Prince of Asgard, a powerful warrior and a setter user, one of the most powerful. He would get out of these woods. I promise you we will get out of these Iron Woods, he said almost softly. Safe and sound? Isa inquired, her lower lip trembling. Loki opened his lips to answer, but suddenly they heard a wolf howling and looked out around them fearfully. Loki grabbed her upper arm and pulled at her, starting to move once again. He sensed her eyes on him, still waiting for his answer, but he didn't want to give the false promises, so he pretended not to care and stared ahead of him, his heart beating hollowly in his chest. He dropped her arm, and she stopped waiting for an answer. After a long minutes, where the only sound that could be heard was the wind and the dead leaves, Isa spoke up again. Did we not walk by here already? She asked, slowing down to stare at the trees. Loki looked around as well before clenching his jaw, lips tightening. All those trees look the same. There's no way to know. Perhaps we're in that damn witch's house and we're just walking in the circle. She probably expects us to exhaust ourselves before dropping the illusion. Isa looked uncomfortable for a moment before drawing closer to him. Isn't it how wolves hunt? She asked in a low voice, hurting her prey before letting them fall of exhaustion. She called it. She said it was a hunt, she murmured. Loki stared at her for a moment before looking around him, unsure of what he would believe. Maybe everything he was seeing was just an illusion, since the crossway and the labyrinth. He wasn't sure of anything more. He clenched his fists, all the nerves trembling with rage. He hated feeling so weak, being so powerless in the mercy of this witch and her wolves. The last time he was used and played like this, his deepest wounds and fears had been opened. He had been bleeding ever since, those nightmares and feelings hunting him in every moment of his life. He was done being played with. I won't be hunted by anything or anyone, Loki stated with a cold voice, his blood boiling in fury. It's time to make the tables turn. Isa stared at him, bewildered, feeling suddenly impressed and almost scared by his dark silhouette. Loki? She asked, called hesitantly, attempting to step forward. He either didn't hear her or ignored her, as she froze when she saw the green setter surrounding him. He closed his eyes. He could sense his fingertips burning with magic, but he didn't release it yet. If everything around him was some sort of illusion to turn him mad with fear while being chased by the Hyrrokin and her wolves, then he'd just be able to bring down the illusion. The last time he had faced one, it was the fiery Isa in the labyrinth, and he had torn it apart from his rage. This time he would break every last bit of Hyrrokin's hallucinations into pieces. Magic is all about a whisper, he murmured to himself, feeling the cold air around him turning electric. Isa took a step backwards when she saw swirls of green magic surrounding them. A wild wind rose suddenly, shaking their hair and clothes. Loki, what are you doing? She asked, now fearing what he could be doing. Once again, he didn't seem to hear her, her voice lost in the wind. Isa looked around anxiously, but she couldn't see anything from Hyrrokin. Loki, she exclaimed, trying to bring him back, but he was lost in rage and emotions. Loki's hands were now swirling with magic, green setter illuminating his face. He opened his eyes, an evil glint shining in the greenish orbs, as his lips moved slowly, whispering his magical energy into the wind. Destroy it all, he breathed, before grinning wickedly. Isa's eyes widened and she shouted before falling onto the ground, covering her head with her arms. At the same time, Loki's magic exploded. The green light hit the ground before spreading everywhere. On the ground, the trees, the air, nothing was spared, not even Isa, who was propelled backwards violently. The fallen leaves flew around the closet, trees burnt, but it wasn't from the fire or electricity. Green flames enveloped them before, leaving nothing but black silhouettes of the trees they had once been. The sound of magic and the howling wind echoed in the entire forest. When Isa was able to open her eyes again and breathe, she immediately looked at her hands to make sure she was safe. Once reassured about her safety, she looked back at Loki, who was still standing on the ground. Then she heard deep growls. Isa just had enough time to look around to realize that there were half a dozen wolves surrounding them. Some stood on the ground, some held onto the trunks with some incredible strength. All growled in a threatening way. Their rage focused solely on Loki. They had been hidden from their view, those creatures ready to attack at any moment. They had been followed them from the beginning. Knowing that they were discovered, several wolves howled in the wind, colder and different from the one Loki had raised with his magic, came to them. In some twisted way, Isa and Loki guessed it was Hyrrokin's presence, much more vivid to them now that he had destroyed all the illusion around them. A wolf barked at Loki before leaping forward. Steps were slow at first, before accelerated and took in momentum to jump at the prince. Let the hunt begin, Loki shouted, crouching down while glaring and grinning at the animal. He took out his dagger, and then the wolf jumped, ready to strike down the god. As the wolf rose above him, he struck, not with his dagger, but with his sword of setter, so that when the wolf should have fallen on Loki and torn his throat open, it was the wolf's throat bleeding instead. Loki shouted in rage as he swung his setter blade above his head, cutting the animal in half. It yapped and fell to the ground in two different pieces, limbs moving frantically for a short moment before ceasing. For a moment, nothing moved or breathed. Everything stopped. The entire forest frozen to take in the fact that one of its wolves had died. Isa stopped breathing, eyes wide and staring at the dead animal, while Loki swung his magical sword around. Using his head setter to create a blade was hard and complicated spell that required a lot of focus and power. Loki didn't need any of it. He was above it all. He reached a level of magic that didn't require whispering magical words, focus, or a giant power. He was above it all. He was the real master of magic. Then the air turned icy cold when the wind turned to a hiss, the hiss of fury and pain from the Hyrule wherever she was. All the wolves jumped and barked at Loki at once. Loki didn't even blink, swinging his green fiery sword around, throwing daggers and knives to injure the wolves. Limbs were cut, animals were howling in rage and pain, blood was spilling everywhere. In only few minutes, all the wolves were dead. Iza stared at Loki, who was shaking from adrenaline, rage and exhaustion as he breathed harshly, his face covered in sweat and blood. His eyes were wide open as he blinked slowly before his center blade disappeared and the dagger that was at the base of his sword slipped from his fingers, sliding without a sound on the leaves. Loki looked around and then down at his trembling hands, unsure if he had done so much damage to his own. When he looked over his shoulder at Iza, still kneeling on the ground, eyes widened in shock and lips parted in astonishment, he knew he had done it. He wasn't sure if he was proud of any of it, but he knew he had been right. He had destroyed the illusion that would surely turn him mad. He had killed the wolves that would have attacked him and killed him at any moment, and neither he nor Iza was hurt in any way. He acted rightly in order to save them, but he didn't feel proud in any way. He looked again at the butcher corpses of wolves, swallowing hard when he realizes that he didn't know. At this point in the mission, if he would feel his pride, he would have found the truth of the mountain giants for his father, and he hadn't caused the war himself. Why did he felt so hollow then? Why did he felt like everything he'd done so far, all the pain he had gone through, and the blood he had been bled out, and what had been meaningless? Just a few minutes ago, he had felt good when he had let out his rage, even though his magic killed those wolves. But had the labyrinth scared him that much? He would have felt alive only when he felt being raging. Loki? He turned towards Iza, who was slowly straightening up, looking around at the dead wolves. Iza, you're all right? She asked, staring at him into the eyes. He opened his lips to answer and took a deep breath, straightening his back, looking up at the trees around him. Somehow the trees seemed alike, as if the illusion of walking away the same trees were gone, as if they could get out of his forest. What did you just did? Iza stared, walking towards him while avoiding the bits of wolves. Loki looked back at her as she was staring and looking around, impressed by his actions earlier. She smiled at him, her eyes gleaming. It was absolutely amazing. You looked so fierce and powerful. So do you know how complicated setter blades is hard to make? You did it perfectly. She grabbed his face with two of her hands, fingers almost digging into his skin. You are even more powerful than I thought you could be, she whispered before pulling him down to a kiss. Loki felt too numb nor disturbed by his own actions to kiss her back, as he furiously she was kissing him. But when she pulled away, he didn't seem to notice his shaken eyes. This sword you used as a blade, will you give it a name? She asked, tilting her head to one side. Loki looked down at the dagger still fumbling in his magic. It was resting on the wet ground at his feet, but before he could answer or even think about answer, they would have heard the violent hissing sound. It was the sound of the wind howling its fury, echoed by the wolves barking at rage. Loki looked over Iza's shoulder. She followed his gaze and they froze for a short moment. We need to leave now, he shouted, leaning down to take his dagger before taking her hand and starting to run. They had heard more wolves howling and barking as Hyrukin's high-pitched, inhuman shriek shook their bones. They looked over their shoulders. The vision they were welcomed with only encouraging them to accelerate. The rest of the wolves' pack was running furiously after them, and in the middle, leading them, was Hyrukin, fighting in her dark, shriveling robes. She was standing in some sort of sledge, making a sharp black iron. The deadly sledge was pulled by a gigantic black horse with eyes as black as Mistress. Her left arm was holding the reins, while her right was holding a long black whip. It made it slam while the horse neighed, his scream echoed by the howls of wolves. Loki and Iza were running as fast as possible, jumping over dead trunks and sliding on leaves, slaloming between the trees as fast as possible. But the sledge and the wolves were drawing closer. A wolf that was faster than the other jumped in front of Loki and Iza. They barred brakes suddenly before changing course. But the wolf jumped on Iza, who fell to the ground with a scream, under the weight of the animal. The prince turned around and threw a knife right between the animal's eyes, but it wasn't the same weapon as the setter blade. It hurt the wolf, but didn't kill him. It only yelped and barked, shaking its head, but it gave enough time for Isa to grab her own dagger and dive it into the animal's throat. Blood spilled from the wound, and the wolf barked up again, its strangled voice, while she pushed it off her body, moving her sharp dagger so that it would hurt the wolf even more. He fell on its side, condemned to bleed out, while she struggled on her feet as the two lovers continued their crazy run. Loki and Isa ran as fast as possible, but the wolves had caught up with them, surrounding them in a threatening circle, cutting off all their ways out. They looked around at the numerous giant wolves ready to attack them, weapons raised ready to fight. When they heard the sliding of the sledge approaching them behind them, the whip slamming in the air violently. They turned around when the Hyrule arrived. Her face was furious and her eyes colder than Jonanum's icy hands. Loki and Isa both shivered at this, seeing her, and she slammed her weapon at the air once again. "You will pay for what you have done to both of you. You should have not played with me, Loki Oldison. I will make you suffer for my children. You will both regret entering the Iron Woods," she shouted with a hissing, threatening voice. Her horse neighed, and wolves barked furiously to support her. Loki noticed and dread that her reins were moving on their own, before realizing that they were big black snakes, hissing furiously, and as angry as their mistress. Loki held back a shiver while Hyrule lifted her arm up and lashed out with her whip. It grabbed Isa around her neck. She screamed before either her or the prince could react. Hyrule pulled viciously, almost ripping the brown-haired woman's skin off. Isa flew along with the sledge to the witch's feet. She tried to get up, grabbing the whip around her neck with her hands, but her face was too covered in the wolf's blood, only to show her struggle. "No!" she gasped, when the Hyrule pulled her up on her feet, furious forcefully, almost strangling her in the process. "Hyrule, you can't do that!" she cried out, her voice breaking. Loki threw one of his knives at the Hyrule, but her arm had been freed from her snake rein. She had caught it just before it touched her face, her black eyes glancing at Loki and staring right into his soul. His heart missed a beat as the Hyrule pulled Isa even closer to her, her lips just next to the young woman's ear. The two women stared at Loki with very different expressions, the witch looking dreadful in her cold rage, her black orbs in a pit of darkness that seemed to corrupt Loki's sanity. The setter's user was staring at the god with a frightened expression, her eyes panicked and scared. "I said you both pay!" Hyrule hissed into Isa's ear. She then thrusted Loki's knife into Isa's back. Isa gasped, struggling for air, while her eyes widened in shock and panic, her limbs trembling. The raven-haired man's heart missed a beat as he tried to move forward before freezing in shock. Hyrule's whip fell from around them and the woman's neck. Isa fell to the ground, her body limp. Loki stared at her body, the woman he had made love to only a day before, and then looked back up at the Witch of the Iron Woods, his lip parted in shock, unable of any movement or word. "Your turn, pretty prince," he murmured, making her whip slamming against the air violently.
What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, please stay pretty.